Victor Zhang is what's known as a Huayi, a foreign-born ethnically Chinese person now living in China. Last year, Zhang moved from Washington, D.C. to Beijing for the second time. He speaks fluent Mandarin but says fitting in here has been a challenge.
It's only in China when I am fully aware that I'm a Huayi. I'm made aware of it every day and every hour. You know, whenever I go on the media, everyone will say, oh, look, it's the banana. Or, oh, look, it's another Huayi just trying to take our money. Or people will point out that it's a traitor.
Zhang is now working on a project documenting those experiences and trying to better understand the social attitudes that shape them. Today he's interviewing Gang Xin, a native-born Chinese 34-year-old he met at the gym. Gang tells him China welcomes everyone.
两面性就是比较广。
When I first meet a Huayi, naturally I will treat them as a foreigner. But if they wish to identify as Chinese, I'm happy to treat them as such.
Over the last decade, a growing number of young Huayi began moving to China. Many say they were drawn by the economic opportunity in the country, but quickly found themselves too foreign to be considered Chinese.
Most end up in major cities, where they blend in with the native population or with foreigners, or often with others like themselves, whose identity falls somewhere in between. Joanna Shu's parents moved to Portugal from China before she was born. She recently moved back.
You can always feel comfortable between your circle of friends, but outside of it, if they can find it strange somehow, and they find it different, they're going to say something about it. Not to me, but between them.
I just want people to treat each other better, to treat each other with more respect, and to be able to sympathize with the other side.
He hopes this is a good start.
Here in Washington, you are back from Beijing. This is a very specific segment of this population of people returning home. What kind of numbers are we talking about?
You know, it's difficult to gauge because while the Chinese government obviously monitors the number of immigrants coming to live in China, it doesn't really break them down into groups. So if you're a U.S. citizen and you're coming to live somewhere in China, the Chinese government doesn't necessarily note if you are ethnically Chinese, meaning if you are a Chinese American, meaning it simply notes you as American. Now, within China, of course, you've got lots of groups. You've got a big wave of ethnically Chinese Australians. You've got a big wave of ethnically Chinese coming from Europe, and of course from the United States. And what's interesting is they of course go to the first tier cities, the big cities like Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou. And the reason they do that is because that's where most foreigners would go anyway. They're most comfortable in English. They do have a significant grasp of Mandarin, speaking it from home. But oftentimes when they open their mouth, people suddenly discover they're not from China. And that's really where they get stuck in the middle. And I think one of the most fascinating things is that if you observe these groups, you'll see oftentimes that they don't really socialize entirely with the foreigners, or at least what you would call the white foreigners that are there, or the Spanish foreigners. Oftentimes they associate with other Huayi like themselves. There are also ethnically Chinese Asian expats who are living in Beijing. Sometimes they mix, but there is some tensions because the ethnically Chinese ones have the advantage of speaking Mandarin. Some of them try to cross over with the Chinese, but oftentimes there is a cultural gap. These are people who are raised abroad and might not have the same cultural references, background references, familiarities, values that Chinese who were born and raised in China have. And there is sometimes tension, some of it visible, sometimes under the current. Some of them view their families as having left China at a time when China really needed people for growth. They left and went to the West, and now their children are coming back, and sometimes they're viewed. The word that was used, that he told me that Victor Zhang, who he saw there, used for traitor, was even stronger than what he said it means in English. It's somebody who commits treason, somebody who might be fraudulent. And these are terms that have come up because they see them as not as Chinese as they are. And there is that dynamic of cultural tension. And we should note this is not unique just to China. Of course, Hispanic Americans in the US who often go to Latin America speaking Spanish find that same dynamic. But because China is such a draw to some people, we're seeing that more and more.
All right, interesting, fascinating stuff. Rory Ruttenberg, thank you for that.